So I just binged Netflix's new original series, I'm Not Okay With This. I think that's the title. I may have butchered it slightly. I think they just put too many words in that title, honestly. But I'm really having a hard time figuring out what I thought of it. I enjoyed it for the acting, but I don't know that it had an amazing story, but I definitely felt like it harkened back, and this was intentional on its part, to the 80s movies that John Hughes did that were very, very emotional. And I appreciate it for that aspect because I feel like people are just afraid to be cheesy with their movies these days, and that's causing people to make everything be kind of grim and dark and somber. And there's just a lack of warmth and joy and honest human emotion in film and in television these days. So I appreciated that this show harkened back to a warmer, happier time when, yeah, people were angsty, but there was positive outlets for it, and you felt like at the end of the day, things would get better, through relationships and through talking to people. That said, like I kind of said, I just didn't feel like the story quite had it all. I didn't agree with a lot of the decisions the characters made. And I know that I'm probably in a minority on this, but I'm getting tired of Netflix setting up relationships in their shows only to go in a different direction, probably out of a desire to please a certain demographic of fans. So for those of you who don't know, and this is probably a little bit late in the video to get going on this, but I'm gonna better late than never, right? So the plot of I'm Not Okay With This, it's based on a graphic novel by the author of another graphic novel that they base another Netflix series, The End of the Beep World, on. So this series, I have not actually seen that series, but I assume that they probably have similarities, at least in some regards. I might check that one out after this, just out of interest, although I don't know whether I'll like it or not, because I didn't love this one. I mostly liked it, but needless to say, the story is about Sydney, who is this girl growing up in Pittsburgh, I guess. I mean, I don't remember if the show actually said, but I know that they shot in Pittsburgh, so I guess that's where it's taking place. And it's kind of unclear if this is taking place in the 80s or if it's just riffing on the 80s. They talk about laser discs at one point, which I believe dates this, but I'm not sure if that was like a reference specifically to establish the time period, or if it was just establishing that the character is very much out of touch with the time period that he's living in. But anyway, so Sydney is this girl who's dealing with a lot of emotional issues that teenage girls deal with. She feels gross because she has zits on her legs. Her mom has to work constantly, and that leaves her to take care of her younger brother, which she feels is unfair. And her father committed suicide a year before, and her best friend has just started dating a guy who she really doesn't think highly of. He's the popular kid in school, and she just thinks he's shallow and her friend shouldn't be dating him. Plus, she's kind of having some weird emotions towards her friend and their relationship that get explored further as the series goes along. And all this to say, complicating things is she starts to realize that she's having these powerful outbursts that cause things around her to be destroyed, and they usually are tied to negative emotions on her part. I was trying to figure out the whole time what was triggering these, because I was sure it was a metaphor for something, the superpowers, as her stoner neighbor Stanley Barber calls them, who is a comic book nerd who is interested in dating her, but eventually, it becomes clear that maybe they're not meant to date, maybe they're just meant to be friends. But he's a constantly steadying presence in her life throughout this series. The character played by Wyatt Oleff, I would consider changing my name if I were him. I don't know that that's a name that people are going to remember. But regardless, He's the most engaging character in the show from my perspective. He's kind of a stereotypical character. He gives off Sirius Ducky from Pretty in Pink vibes, and the whole show has a very John Hughes tone that makes it unclear whether it's supposed to be taking place in the 80s or if it's just riffing on the 80s. But anyway, he's the friend that's kind of being a steadying presence in her life, encouraging her to try and figure out what's going on with her powers. I felt like the metaphor might be that the powers are kind of representing her desire to hide the shameful aspects of herself. And whenever she feels exposed or vulnerable, or that the worst parts of herself are getting shown to the world around her, that's when the powers seem to manifest themselves. But there were some inconsistent things with that, and there were some situations where the powers didn't manifest themselves that kind of hint at where they might be going with it. But the creator of this show has said they're going to explore it a lot more in the next season, if there is a next season. Now, it was interesting because the show is super short. The episodes are like less than 20 minutes each, which was odd after watching Hunters last week, where the episodes were as long as 90 minutes in some cases. But it was refreshing. But they're 7 20-minute episodes, so I basically feel like they took a 2-hour movie and cut it into 7 segments. But that's okay. It was very, very nice to see a show that just takes advantage of the streaming platform it's on and just fills out the amount of episodes and the amount of runtime that it has story for, and doesn't try to do more than that. I feel like a lot of times shows run into trouble because they're trying so hard to go on for a really long time, and then maybe they don't have enough story to fill it out, so they end up padding it, and it ends up having pacing issues. So I really appreciated that it just felt like they told the story in the runtime that they needed to. And it was a nice feeling to be like, oh, wow, the episode's already over, on to the next one. I mean, the whole series was practically over before I realized it. So I can't really say I had a negative experience, because I was entertained the whole time, and it was over pretty quickly, like almost before I wanted it to be. It seems like it's heading in a constructive direction at the end, but then it ends on a mic drop moment that is really quite shocking and really does a good job of setting up the next season. I think that even though I didn't necessarily love this season, I think it will definitely be something I'll tune into when the next season comes out. I also appreciate that because of all the John Hughes references and the effort to tell the story in a way that, you know, anyone can relate to. I appreciate that makes it feel less like a lot of the teenage dramas that Netflix is pushing out lately, where you just kind of feel like it wasn't meant for you if you're not a teenager. So I appreciated that. I feel like also the 80s references will bring in a lot of people who are like, I remember all these things. It's cool that they're speaking my language. Nostalgia is in right now, you know? But, you know, I don't really have any major critiques of it. I guess I just felt like it was a little bit shallow, and it was one of those shows where you really feel like you need more seasons to really truly understand where it's coming from, what it's trying to say, and all that jazz. But it was entertaining throughout. The characters have good chemistry for the most part. I really do feel like it is Stanley Barber's show. Sydney was good. Sophia Lillis, I think, is going to cause a lot more people to be interested in this show because she was in It, and I think people will recognize her. Wyatt, Oleff, was also in It, but I don't think as many people will remember him from that as her. I think she had a more prominent role. And I think they're both quite good here. They have great chemistry as characters, and they're really the only 2 characters in the show that I cared about. There were other characters that, you know, get a decent amount of screen time, but those 2 have the most screen time. And honestly, I just didn't care about any of the other characters that much. Gina, Sydney's friend, is another character in the show, you know, that has plays into Sydney's psychology in a complicated way, but I just wasn't interested in her. I didn't think the actress was very good. I didn't think she had chemistry with Sydney. Maybe I'm wrong, that's just my opinion, but I wasn't interested personally. But what did you think? Let me know in the comments section. I'm planning to do a review of Altered Carbon Season 2, hopefully sometime tomorrow. So if you want to see that, please subscribe so that you'll know right away when it comes out. And if you like what I'm doing on the channel, please just feel free to give me a like. Thanks.